Hello and welcome everyone. It's great to see many people back from sessions across this week as we conclude this week of our Community Wealth Building Summit. So many conversations, many light bulb moments, connections made, familiar faces, new faces. Such a lot has happened, it feels like, since Sarah kicked us off back on Monday morning with Mr. Tom Arthur from the Scottish Government. So here we are at our final session. I'm delighted to have with us friends from our supporters and partners in this event, from Barry Cadbury Trust, from Power to Change, and from the Democracy Collaborative. I'm going to start with a little bit of housekeeping and then run through what we're going to be doing in the session today, and then I'll get on with introducing our keynote speaker, Kate Pickett, in a few moments. So you'll all be familiar with this now from across the week, but we are recording this session. So if you don't want to be on that recording, please mute and turn your video off. That would be great. We've got about 150 people registered for the session this afternoon. So there will be opportunities for you to put your hand up if you like during the session. But for now, it would be really helpful to know who's in the room and for you to introduce yourselves to each other. So you can use the chat function to do that. We have been keeping a keen eye on the what will you do on Monday forms that many of you have been filling in and sending in to us over the week, which are really great. And we're going to get stuck into some of the responses that we've had to that later on in the session. But a reminder, there is still time to fill in those forms. So my colleague Lisa is going to be posting a link to that in the chat shortly, and you can fill those in over the course of the next hour if something strikes you or comes to you. Also, it'd be really great to see people active on social media for this session, hashtag CWB Summit. If you've got an opportunity to do that, that would be really good too. So we've got a couple of hours ahead of us. In a moment, as I said, I'll hand over to epidemiologist and activist Kate Pickett, who'll give us our keynote speech for this afternoon. After her speech, Kate will be joined by Sarah Longlands, our chief exec, in conversation, and then they'll take questions from you. So do start adding those into the Q&A box as soon as that session starts. And then after we've heard from Kate and Sarah, we're going to take a bit of a step back and get into reflective mode about the week, thinking about what we've learned this week and what we want to take away and turn into action on the ground. So Sarah's going to kick us off with her thoughts about what it's going to look like at CLES on Monday and for the many Mondays after that. So she'll be sharing those thoughts with us, and then we'll have a short break for you to gather your own thoughts and to come back together and hear from 4 brilliant speakers that are joining us from our partner organisations this afternoon. So they'll be talking a little bit about what they're going to be doing on Monday in their own organisations. And then we'll get into a bit of discussion about some of the themes that we've had through from participants during the week. And finally, we'll be turning over to yourselves to hear what your thoughts are about what you'll be doing in the weeks and months and years ahead. So there'll be a chance at that last session to actually hear directly, we hope, from some of you as participants in the sessions and as perhaps the most important, or definitely the most important, people in this room today. And then Sarah will close the session and send us on our way for a weekend to perhaps recover, but definitely to consider where we go and start this next phase of our work. Okay, so without further ado, I would love to introduce our keynote speaker, Kate Pickett. Kate is epidemiologist and political activist. She's Professor of Epidemiology at the Department of Health Sciences at the University of York and was a National Institute for Health Research career scientist from 2007 to 2012. With Richard Wilkinson, she co-authored The Spirit Level, Why More Equal Societies Almost Always Do Better, and is co-founder of the Equality Trust, a not-for-profit organisation seeking to explain the benefits of a more equal society. Much of Kate's research focuses on the social determinants of health, including the influences of factors such as social class, income inequality, neighbourhood context, and ethnic diversity on outcomes such as mortality, morbidity, teenage birth, obesity, and other health-related behaviours. And I'm particularly delighted to be here with Kate today. Her book, The Spirit Level, had a defining impact on me and many millions of others. It was in brave and clear terms that they set out what many of us sensed, that our problem is not a lack of wealth, but where and to who that wealth goes. And it is that foundational truth which powers much of community wealth building. So over to you, Kate. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Fran. Thank you for that really kind introduction, and thank you for inviting me to be here today. It's a real pleasure, and I'm noticing lots of names I know popping up in the chat, so it's great to be part of this session this afternoon. And always lovely, of course, as an author, to hear that your work has had an impact on somebody, so that's great. I have been in sessions where people have told me I should read that book, so not realising actually I helped to write it. So it's nice to hear that it's been meaningful to you. I'm going to share my screen if I can. Let's go ahead and see how that's working. Could you give me a thumbs up if you can see it? Yeah, thank you. Okay. So as Fran said, I'm Kate. I'm an epidemiologist, and that means I study the distribution and the determinants of health and disease in the society. So rather than asking what affects, a single person's chances of being healthy or being sick, I ask about whole groups within a population, or whole populations. And for a long time, my research has focused on the impact of inequality on health and well-being, and has shown, there's now a very robust body of evidence that when income inequality grows within a society, we see an increase in a whole range of health and social problems. That work with Richard Wilkinson is encapsulated in two books now. And about a decade ago, in 2009, we published The Spirit Level, which is subtitled Why Equality is Better for Everyone. We actually prefer the American edition, which says it's better for almost everyone, which is probably closer to the truth. But what we were doing in that book was pulling together evidence that we've been gathering, and include the work of other people across the world, that showed that income inequality is linked to a wide range of health and social problems. So if you live in a society with a bigger gap between rich and poor, that population is going to have lower life expectancy, higher rates of infant mortality, more obesity, more mental illness and distress, more drug use and addiction, but also social problems increase. So trust declines, social mobility is lower, there are higher levels of violence and higher levels of imprisonment, and life trajectories are changed. So young people are less likely to fulfill their potential. There are bigger gaps in educational attainment between those at the top and those at the bottom of society, more kids dropping out of school, and lower levels of child well-being. And I think what was perhaps new to some people when we published that synthesis of all of that research was how big the differences were. So if you're comparing different rich developed countries, or you're comparing different United States, you could see tremendously big differences between them related to inequality. And that was helping us to really see that it's not just the poor who are affected by inequality. Inequality affects the whole population. And so if you live in a more unequal society, even if you are fortunate enough to be well educated and affluent and in a higher social class, you and your children are more likely to suffer from a whole range of health and social problems than your counterparts in a more equal place. So those were the three important take-home messages of that work about a decade ago. And then in 2018, we published a follow-on book called The Inner Level. And what we were doing in that work was trying to look at the pathways between inequality and health and social problems, trying to understand the causal mechanisms. And what we show in that book is that inequality, the gap between rich and poor again, undermines our feelings of self-worth and therefore damages mental health. In fact, it makes status more important, and therefore where you come in society, whether you're near the top or whether you're near the bottom, it matters more. It's more salient for your health and well-being in a more unequal society. But we also spent quite a bit of time busting some of the popular myths that I think have allowed societies to tolerate high levels of inequality. You know, the idea that it's just human nature for us to be competitive and individualistic and out for ourselves, or that the rich and the powerful are there because they've got some super talents compared to the rest of us, or they work harder. And we show that neither of those myths are true. And we spend a lot of time in that book thinking about how we can tackle inequality and why we have to do so if we're going to make the transition to sustainable well-being and tackle the climate emergency and other environmental crises, as well as improve public health and well-being. So more than a decade's worth of trying to get these messages across to the public and building on much more than a decade's worth of research of our own and that of other people, but never feeling really, I suppose, that it's enough to sit in an academic ivory tower and just do research and just show that these problems exist. So we did, at the same time we published The Spirit Level, co-found with Bill Kerry, the Equality Trust, as Fran mentioned at the beginning, which is now a charity. It has both a central office, but also local groups across the country, with the intention of tackling inequality through educating people and promoting greater equality within the UK. And that organisation exists, it's strong, it's robust, and does a lot of good work. And yet, over the decade since we founded the Equality Trust, we have, of course, not seen big reductions or national strategy to tackle inequality backed by policies that really change things. And in fact, we've had a decade of austerity with things getting much worse. And this is a slide that I borrowed from my colleague at Liverpool, David Taylor Robinson, and his other colleagues, who have shown that over the past decade, it started in 2010 for people living in the lowest social class, but now affects the whole population, that we actually saw a rise in infant mortality from 2010 onwards, but with a particularly noticeable impact since 2013. And that continues. So that even before the pandemic and even before the public health crisis of COVID, we were in this country starting to detect serious impacts of austerity on the health and well-being of the population. So not only did we have very high levels of inequality, the highest levels of economic inequality among Western developed nations in Europe, but also following the decade of austerity, we were starting to see a reversal of some of the progress we've made. An increase in child poverty, an increase in poverty among those living with disabilities, and an increase in infant mortality, a slowing down, and in some cases, a reversal of life expectancy. So we've got a robust body of evidence suggesting that inequality is a cause of poor population health and well-being and social problems. And we'd got an organisation founded to try and tackle that. And in fact, over the decade, we saw other groups start tackling inequality: Resolution Foundation, High Pay Commission. So Oxfam took inequality as a major central plank of their campaigning across that decade. And yet we weren't seeing any change. And I was also working at an international level for much of that time. So on various commissions, at international level, at EU level, that were aimed at reducing inequalities, aimed at improving well-being. So lots of really good work going on at international and national level, but nothing really changing the dial on inequality. So a decade of frustration, I suppose. I mean, I think it's the case that first we need knowledge about a problem. Then we need to hear the rhetoric, I suppose, of people accepting that it's a problem. And I think we've very much got to that stage with the International Monetary Fund, with the World Bank, with governments everywhere, really not being able to say any longer that inequality wasn't a problem and having to admit that it was, and yet not seeing the kinds of strategies and policies that would actually reverse those inequality trends. And where I think we're actually seeing more action these days is at local level rather than national level and rather than international level. And then, of course, along came COVID. Now, at the start of the COVID pandemic, you did hear people talking about this as an equal opportunity disease. That COVID knew no class boundaries, that everybody was at the same risk and that everybody would be equally affected and that we were all in this together. And of course, it was very rapidly apparent that was not true. Being exposed to COVID, being ill from COVID, dying from COVID were not equally distributed. If you were a member of a more deprived community or of a more vulnerable social group, if you had pre-existing illnesses, or if you were in low-paid work, you were much more exposed, much more at risk, much more likely to be more sick, and much more likely to die. So we have, of course, seen that COVID has increased inequalities, it's increased health inequalities, it's increased economic inequalities, and of course, as well as the infection impact, the effect of lockdown and restrictions on people's capabilities to earn a living, to run their businesses, to be economically active, those have all taken a toll on equality as well. And throughout the pandemic, the ability of the super rich and the super powerful to make more money and to benefit from this tragedy has also become really apparent. So I think in the context of failing to see strong national strategy on inequality and understanding the impact of the COVID pandemic, I was delighted actually to be asked to chair the Greater Manchester Independent Inequalities Commission. And that was a 6-month project that ran from autumn 2020 through to the spring of 2021. And I was joined in that effort by the former head, chief executive of the Centre for Local Economic Strategy, Neil McKinley. He was one of our commissioners, but we were a group of several people. We met with policymakers, members of the public, members of different groups across that 6 months, and we worked to try and come up with concrete recommendations for the city region of Greater Manchester that would help it reduce socioeconomic inequalities and improve the health, well-being, and local economy. And we asked, in our final report, we asked that people and Greater Manchester Combined Authority ask them to imagine what a city region would look like that was creating good lives for everybody. And we asked them to imagine living in a city region that puts people at the heart of local economic development and of regeneration, and a city region where all the major institutions work together to use their financial power and role as influencers to direct wealth into the local economy, promoting inclusivity and social value. And of course, that's exactly what community wealth building strategies are doing. So we were asking Greater Manchester to recognise the power of community wealth building and to put their strategic and economic power behind the creation of a network, an action network of anchor institutions to try and promote that more locally. So we asked that that would be an early action by the Combined Authority following the local elections in May, that they would bring together organisations that have previously been involved in community wealth building with others that have shown leadership, and develop a plan and a strategy to create that anchor action network in the city region. So we're asking them to use their spending, to use their investment and their soft power to drive social value and support disadvantaged groups and create good, secure and living wage jobs. So community wealth building was the second of our set of recommendations, and it was really at the heart of us asking the city region to put greater equality and put people's well-being at the heart of everything they do. I'm pleased that they've recently asked us if we will go back, if the Commission will reconvene in the new year to look at what progress has been made. And we're expecting to have formal reporting on what has been done across the city region within the combined authority and within its constituent 10 local authorities to meet this recommendation and make progress in this area. But before I close and go into conversation with Sarah, I think it's my belief over the years I've been working in this area that within the UK at the moment, it is at local level that we see the most potential and the most action to try and reduce inequality and improve people's well-being. We see it in the devolved governments. We see it in many of our local authorities and combined authorities. I think a real commitment to try and change things around, whereas at national government level, at the moment, we get rhetoric, but no action. We get rhetoric in the right direction and policy and budgets and investment tending to move in the wrong direction. So I think we have to take action as communities, and we have to work locally if we want to see the changes that we desire to see in the world that will help us to build back better and fairer following COVID and tackle the grand challenges of our time, like the climate emergency and high levels of economic inequality. So I'll stop there. Looking forward to chatting with Sarah and then to all of you in the rest of the hour.
Wonderful, thank you, Kate. What a fantastic survey of the landscape we find ourselves in, and a call to evidence-based action. I think that's what I'd call it. Great, so Sarah, lovely to have you back with us and to pick up the conversation with Kate. I just wondered whether, it really struck me thinking about what you were saying, Kate, and thinking back to Tom Arthur's opening speech at the beginning of the week about how the Scottish Government has gone about its community wealth building work with pilots at a local level, and from that taking the learning and using that to build their community wealth building act that they're going to be putting forward. So just wondered if maybe this conversation about what can you do and what are perhaps some of the limits of what you can do at a local level on these questions about community wealth building and tackling inequality. Sarah, do you want to come in?
Yeah, it's the challenges at a local level particularly. Yeah, I mean, I think I was thinking about, I've been reflecting on this as well during the week. And I think one of the brilliant things about the event this week has been just how much good stuff is going on. But yet how much sort of resistance there still is out there to the idea that wealth should be much more fairly shared in our communities. And I think one of the biggest challenges is actually about mindset. And actually someone described it yesterday as automated thinking. And I think there's a lot of that about where people, I mean, there's a wider point that the status quo suits those who have the wealth and hold the wealth and power in society. But there's also another point, I think, just that people have gotten used to a way of doing things. And I think the impact of austerity and the way in which our country feels like it's got smaller over the last sort of 10 years, I think has reinforced this idea that we've lost that sense of the bigger vision, the bigger picture, and what it is we're trying to achieve as a society. So I think trying to overcome that inertia of mindset and that automated thinking that someone mentioned yesterday, I think that's one of the biggest challenges we face. And you know, I think what we've seen during the summit is how people are actually successfully managing to do that across the UK, particularly in the devolved nations and regions.
Yeah, that there is real movement, and people grappling with how to do it, not just whether you should or shouldn't be doing it. In that, yeah, I mean, I think in that, Sarah, and then picking up in what you were talking about, Kate, this question about that's come up a number of times this week, that there is still a bit of a drag that this stuff gets pulled to, oh, it's social policy, isn't it? Yeah. And then the economy gets left to kind of continue doing its own thing. Kate, I'd wondered if you had any thoughts about, I don't know, is there an answer to that? How do we make it the business of economy?
Yeah, I think the idea that the economy sits separately from society, sits separately from nature is something we're going to have to divest ourselves of if we're going to have sort of joined up thinking and strategy to approach all of the challenges we're facing. Yeah, there is inertia, and I think often, of course, resistance to ideas that people view as coming from a political different place to where they're at. And yet, so often, if you actually sort of dig down into what people think or ask them about their opinions, freed of sort of political constraints, you find that surprising things like, 80% of the people who were asked about one of Jeremy Corbyn's strategies, and yet were Conservative voters, thought they were a good idea. But if they had been told they were his strategies, they wouldn't have done. Or we have public surveys that show 80–90% of the public think that inequality is wrong and that the government should do something about it, or think that universal basic income is a good idea. And yet these ideas can still get badged as being far left or too progressive or too socialist. But I think we're seeing progress on some of that thinking. And of course, a crisis does always crack open the possibility for change. But we mustn't forget, I think, that we've been directed to think about the economy in certain ways, and we've been directed to think about policy in certain ways. We were told very stridently that austerity was the only possibility for us in 2010, and that if we did not pursue the economics of austerity, we would be in trouble, and that we can't just spend when we want to, and there is no such thing as a magic money tree. And yet then in the face of COVID, we find there is actually, and we can spend on the things that are important to us, and we can support the population and the economy in ways that previously government was pretending that we couldn't. So we mustn't forget all those lessons we've learned, I think, and we mustn't lose sight of this opportunity to push for the progressive change we need.
Sarah, do you want to come back in on that?
Yeah, just on that point about sort of social versus economic. I mean, I know from my time in local government, I remember talking at an event and talking about like the issues of poverty, particularly child poverty, that the area that I worked in had. And afterwards, one of my, managers or, the great and the good of the organisation said, oh, no, you shouldn't, no, don't talk down our place. This is, we need, if we want our economy to grow, we've got to talk about how great everything is and how important our industry is and our sectors and the strengths of our area are. And don't be talking it down. If that's a social issue, it's got nothing to do with what we're trying to do here. And I was like really shocked by that, because I think that goes on a lot. That people feel that if you start talking about the challenges or the real life problems that people have to deal with on a day-to-day basis, that's kind of somehow irrelevant. And I think there's something about that. I think you're right, Kate, when you speak to individual people, there's a real concern at a local level about poverty, about the challenges people face, but it's implicit. It's never an explicit part of a strategy. The strategy explicit focus is growth or creating a good place to live. It's not, it's not the implicit stuff about actually just trying to improve people's human welfare, So I think this, and I think the work that Kate's done and others on trying to bring those issues together into a single narrative, I think is hugely important.
I wonder if this speaks to a question that's getting a lot of attention in the box at the moment, which is have either of you know of examples of places where in communities people have been able to sort of make that link to say, you know, there's nothing natural or inherent about this situation of inequality. There is something we can do. This is all up for grabs, and kind of help, particularly on economics and kind of what feels like a kind of black box to lots of people. Help people to get to a place where they can say, actually, these things aren't natural and inherent, and we can change them. I just wonder if at a grassroots level, either of you know of examples of places that managed to do that well.
I think there are hundreds, if not thousands. I remember when Andrew Sims was at the New Economic Foundation, and he published an article in The Guardian. I think it was titled "Welcome to Goodland." And in it, he described a place where everything's wonderful, you know, it's sort of utopia, where the president of the country only takes the median income as his wage, where, you know, green policies are fostered, where everything's wonderful, all children have free access to early childhood education. It went on and on with, you know, all this list of wonderful things. And his point was that they were all happening somewhere. You know, none of them was a pipe dream. They were all happening somewhere in the world. We just didn't have a single place where they were all happening together and all happening at the same time. And when we were doing our work in Greater Manchester, and included in our final report, are numerous sort of cases locally where good things are happening, when people have taken initiative, where they have made change. They're just not all happening in the same place. And I was privileged to actually go to COP26 for a day a couple of weeks ago, and I was really impressed by how many people were there from communities across the world, especially Global South actually, and describing initiatives, local initiatives that they had taken to tackle climate issues and environmental problems, but also to create community wealth and well-being and create opportunities. And many of them driven by women actually, or young people or indigenous groups. So real grassroots, powerful examples of good things happening that we can all learn from.
Right. Sarah, I wondered just your reflections on that, and also somebody else has come with a question saying, what, you know, these feel like big global forces, and if you're a small district council somewhere in the UK, what can you give them some words of courage to sort of pick themselves up and face those forces?
Yeah, well, just to, I guess, echo what Kate said too. I think from our work at CLAS, we see examples, and we have during the summit, of places and people really trying to push at push at the progressive gaps and cracks that we can see in our politics and in our economy, and really trying to do something different. So, you know, just one example, we published a toolkit just a few weeks ago which showed the action that local areas are taking on climate change and on the on a equitable energy transition. And these are just normal places across the UK who have realised there's an issue, realised there's a challenge, and realised that it's within their power to act, and they have done so. And I think it's about trying to amplify what is already going on, and giving people that courage, that sense that they can be brave, that they can take that step, because they're not alone, and lots of other people agree with it and want to support them. So I think that, and I think that speaks to the point about the kind of global forces. I agree. I mean, as an individual, it does feel hugely overwhelming at times, and you worry about your children, you worry about your colleagues, you know, and it is a real issue. But I think, again, local action leads to national change, and I think it's by everybody trying to do something locally to alleviate some of the challenges and the suffering, frankly, that we know that out there, that we will actually in the end up take the argument to Westminster. And I think that's one of the exciting things about the community wealth building movement in England, particularly, in that it has been driven in part by local authorities and by local anchor organisations and community organisations kind of realising that they can do something and wanting to do something in the absence of, in the vacuum that we see at Westminster, and getting on with it. And that's taken bravery, and it's taken willful individuals in those authorities to stick their head above the parapet. So I would say, yes, it's daunting, yes, it's scary, but there's plenty of support out there, and there's plenty of people who are coming behind you and in front of you to kind of offer that support and encouragement.
Brilliant, thanks, Sarah. And so playing into all of that, the kind of energy of the grassroots of people at a local level, you know, making this change happen in reality. Kate, I wondered what your reflections are about where devolution sits in all of that, because obviously chairing the Commission for Greater Manchester, and it's your sense that those moves towards devolution have added fuel to that endeavour, or been a bureaucratic distraction? I don't know. Where do you sit on that?
I think devolution has amplified those movements and is positive, and of course we're seeing it extended. You know, we have a new elected mayor of West Yorkshire, a new combined authority there, and we have seen, I think, through the pandemic, real leadership by devolved authorities with devolved powers, and by the devolved administrations, you know, across the United Kingdom. So I think they have a role to play, and they can, I think, especially if they acted together, have a real convening power and a real influence on national government. But they can also centre resources, investment, strategy in more local places, and amplify what's going on at perhaps a neighbourhood or a community level, and provide leadership there. I mean, they're not going to solve everything, but I think greater devolution of powers and funding, combined with more and more democracy, devolved democracy, and deliberative democracy in local places, those together can probably really amplify what's going on at community level and really provide direction for change. But they're not the answer just by themselves, devolved powers and devolved funding.
Sarah, what's your...
Yeah, I guess my biggest critique of the devolved settlements, the way they currently stand, and I absolutely agree with what Kate said as well, but I think my biggest critique would be that they have very much inherited a treasury model for economic development and growth. And when you dig into the agreements, it's using the traditional kind of market-led approaches, agglomeration, land and property development in city centres. And so I think what would really be interesting is if those devolution settlements agreements, if they could allow combined authorities to diverge from that treasury model and give them some of those economic freedoms to choose a different path, and a more progressive path, obviously. And I think that's kind of a bit of what we're seeing in Scotland and in Wales, and so I think that for me is the real energy.
Wonderful. Okay, so let's cast democracy to one side for the moment, and imagine that that you're, perhaps the two of you are job sharing the Minister for Levelling Up job, and that your job for Monday is to set out your plans for levelling up in the UK, and just reflecting on everything that you've just talked about the importance of the local, about the rooting this in people's lived experience and lives, and the energy at a local level. I just want to ask that question really. What for the national? You know, do we just leave ourselves to say, well, actually we'll make a virtue of this local level and leave it at that, or would you have a policy programme as that? If you were Michael Gove on Monday? Sarah, do you want to kick us off, and then Kate can finish?
Yeah, I'm just imagining being Michael Gove. It's quite terrifying, actually. But I think, well, I suppose the big one for me is about austerity, and trying to use the power of that office to bring an end to that process, because it isn't over yet. I'm sure many local authorities on this at the conference will attest to, and indeed many of the community organisations who are having to bear the brunt of the cuts as well. So I think it would be about trying to bring an end to that, and I guess reminding the Treasury and others across government that local government is not just your seat of democracy at the local level, and very important in terms of national elections, if you want to look at it like that, but it's also where people's lives are most directly impacted, whether it's children's services, social care, planning, all of the things that affect us on a daily basis happen at local government. Now, not all of the powers and funding are there, but that's another story. But something about just simply putting back the respect for the role and purpose of local government and bringing an end to austerity and stabilising funding at a local level, I think would make a massive difference in terms of this, whether you want to call it levelling up or an end to inequality. I think it would make a massive difference in just providing that firm foundation that people can rely upon at a neighbourhood and local level. Brilliant.
Foundations for good lives. Kate, do you want to round us off if you were Michael Gove on Monday?
Well, if I were Michael Gove on Monday, as well as ending austerity, as Sarah suggests, I think I ought to be thinking about ending privilege and really tackling privilege within this country. And there are some concrete things I really think the government should be doing if it truly wants to level up, that are to do with ending private education, that are to do with removing privilege in multiple ways, including having a more progressive inheritance tax, more progressive fiscal policy, etc. But more importantly, I think, if I were Michael Gove on Monday, I think I ought to be thinking about being a leopard who changed my spots, and perhaps giving up my neoliberal ideology and thinking about the alternative economic models which cleverer people than Michael Gove think might be a good idea for levelling up. And I would perhaps try to be a humble Michael Gove on Monday and look at some of those models and think what those could do for us. Because I think transformative leadership will adopt transformative economic policies, and that's what we need.
Wonderful, great. Well, that was the rallying call I think we needed to send us off into our final section of the summit. So thank you so much, Kate, for joining us this afternoon.
Thanks for having me, it's been great.
Wonderful to have you with us, and see you again soon, hopefully. Lovely.
Yeah. Thanks, Fran.
Great. So we're gonna take a deep breath and shift our minds now to what we're all going to do, those of us in the session today, what we're all going to do with everything that's buzzing around in our heads and hearts from this week and from the session that we've just had there with Kate and with Sarah. So the phrase we've bandied around all week, what are we going to do on Monday? Because it's been absolutely clear from every session of every part of this summit that there are people all over the country and in other parts of the world doing this work and have been at it for years, close to a decade now in many places. And there's a huge amount to learn, and that it's the action. Somebody said to me once that community wealth building is 80% practice and 20% theory, and that's where we're turning our heads now, really, to the what can we all do on that 80% of practice and 20% theory in the weeks and months and years to come. So to get us started with this, we're going to hear from Sarah in a minute, who's going to talk to us about what should we do on Monday is going to mean for her and for CLES as an organisation as we move forwards. And then we will have a short break for you to mull that yourselves and then come back with any thoughts on that. So at this point, if you've got things that you want to add about what you want to do on Monday, you can start putting them in the chat box, and we'll start harvesting them from there instead of on the form. But I'll hand over to Sarah to get started. Thanks, Sarah.
Thanks, Fran. And thanks to all of you for joining us this afternoon. It's been really great all week, actually, just seeing so many friends and colleagues from CLES and from organisations that we've worked with and partners. So thanks very much to everyone again for coming along. And in relation to what do we do on Monday, I think for me, it speaks to something that Fran was just saying there, that at CLES, we are an organisation that describe ourselves often as a think and a do organisation. We do a lot of thinking, but actually we also do an awful lot of doing as well, trying to get into the real weeds of how we create social and economic change at the local level. And one of the striking things is that, Fran and I were talking about this yesterday. This is the 4th Community Wealth Building Summit that we've done at CLES. And when you look back, it's a kind of testament of how far we've come on this community wealth building journey. Really, I guess, from what you might describe as the margins to the mainstream, because I mean, back in 2018, we were thinking about how we could start to really kind of mainstream community wealth building. And now, 4 years later, at this summit, we had a Scottish MSP, a minister, talking about wanting to implement a whole system approach to community wealth building to build a well-being economy. And actually this morning we've published some more of our reflections on our work in Scotland, but it shows really how far we've come, that community wealth building is now being adopted by one of our national governments in the UK. And I think that's it's a real sign that things are starting to change, and it should, I hope, give hope and confidence to all of us. I mean, one of the challenges that we've got is that, the community wealth building approach tries to deal with the fact that we don't have necessarily what's often described as a productivity problem, but rather, as Kate was saying, we've got a wealth problem. Too much wealth locked up, frozen and inaccessible to the people and communities that need it most. And our job as wealth builders, all of us here today, our job is to enable wealth to flow much more easily around our local economies so that everyone gets a chance to flourish, to live a life that they have a reason to value, to have choices, to have their basic needs fulfilled, and to feel secure and in control of their lives. Because the consequences, as we all know, of frozen and immobile wealth is insecurity, an economic system which hoards wealth, consumes the planet, and is indifferent to place. And I mean, not only does that exact a terrible cost upon our environment, as we've been talking about at COP, but it means that for people with the least economic power, they end up paying the biggest price, whether that's insecurity of housing tenure, of income and of work. And of course, that's got direct consequences for our democratic system too, because economic power and privileges, as Kate was talking about, is also about political power. And as we were just saying too, the challenges can feel really overwhelming. But what has been so exciting about this week is what we've been able to learn from each other about how we can change things. And all through the week, we've heard examples of where people are trying to work to increase the flow of wealth, increase the flow of wealth in their communities. For example, through procurement, as we know in Wigan are really, pushing on in the discussion. It's no longer procurement, it's an economic development function. They're taking out the emphasis on competition and instead focusing in on good outcomes for people in social care. And they're seeing it not just as a transactional process, but as an opportunity to shape and make markets better, to create good jobs, but also they've got an explicit focus of better care for the people that really need that support. We've also seen it through net zero energy production in Oldham and Plymouth and Birmingham, showing how community wealth building can really help deliver solutions to the environmental crisis. And we've also seen it in some of the examples I heard from North Ayrshire in how they are reshaping their business support to really help local businesses grow and develop and emerge. And as I was just saying when I was speaking to Kate, and as I said on Monday, local action, all of the local action we're doing across the country is ultimately about national change, and I guess that's what this movement is about. We've just been talking about Westminster, and it is really deeply frustrating. We do live in a time when the ambition and scope of our national government for economic change feels really small, and even when it comes to traditional economic questions like transport, as we saw yesterday, stuff that you'd think, the Treasury would be in favour of and the cost benefit analysis would come out well. Even on that, we saw yesterday that when the announcements do come, they're a sort of combination of reheated sound bites and a real lack of ambition and vision for what an economy can be and what it can do to transform people's lives. But that's not the whole story, because the ambition and vision, it may not be coming from Westminster at the moment, but it's coming from all of you, and it's coming from the devolved nations in Holyrood and Cardiff and Belfast, and it is also coming through the work that we're starting to see in the Mayoral Combined Authorities. And Kate mentioned the work in Greater Manchester on the Inequalities Commission. So, you know, there are some real moments of hope there for us. And I guess for us at CLES, that certainly, I think, means three actions for us on Monday. And I don't think we're going to get this all done on Monday, so to be fair, but here's three three things, like kind of three priorities for us to kind of mull over. And first of all, I think it's how do we, that question that Fran asked, you know, is it just about what we do at the local level or what happens at the national? And I think it's about how we work on scaling the movement up, you know, kind of moving beyond, you know, the converter, you know, spreading the learning and creating opportunities to really take it further. And I think we're starting to see that in lots. That's what's really struck me this week, that people are not just talking about, oh, it's a good idea, but now they're saying, right, well, we've started to do this bit on land and property, or we've started to look at our assets, and we found this issue here and we want to push in deeper. So people are really getting into the weeds of this now. And so we also need to think about how we can support each other to answer some of those interesting and difficult questions that are starting to emerge. And I think also part of that is about learning about what we've done today and thinking more about what has worked well and how we can make it work more in the longer term, and how we can connect the benefits to people's lives directly. And also on that point about, you know, how we scale things up, there was a lot of talk this week about language. In almost every session I sat in on, there was a discussion about language, and someone described it beautifully as, you know, the way that we put things. So, you know, how do we use community wealth building to really communicate the messages about wealth and privilege and a better economic approach going forward? So there's a real, I think, interesting challenge for us there as well. So I think that's the first thing about just how do we scale this up and move the debate on and take the movement forward as well. And the second thing I think is I really wanted to focus, I think, on the environmental crisis, because to me that's something that is hugely important for community wealth building, because environmental crisis is a clear and present danger, and you know, community wealth building is one of the really tangible ways that we can get through this crisis. Because I think sometimes the environmental climate crisis is it's seen as kind of somehow to the side of community wealth building, or you know, not quite in the same space. But from where we're sitting at CLES, how local economies function is fundamental to tackling the economic crisis in all its forms. And at the root of the environmental crisis is a wealth and economic crisis. And I mean, there is much that community wealth building is already doing on the environmental crisis, particularly in terms of market shaping, supporting businesses and communities to take action. But one of the other challenges that I think people are starting to really engage with now is that the environmental crisis is underpinned by the fact that the power to change things, to disrupt the status quo of carbon producing companies and economies, is tied up with how wealth works in our society, because too much wealth is locked up, frozen in our communities, which takes it out of the reach of the people who need it most. And that frozen wealth is often tied up with the biggest carbon producers and the decision makers who don't want to shift the status quo because it suits them to keep wealth in that way. And anything which challenges that hoarding of wealth, whether it's calls to eradicate poverty or climate change, falls on deaf ears. So what we need is a bit of global warming in our economic system to defrost the glaciers of wealth which hold people and places back. And we need wealth and capital to start flowing again and start working for our communities, released from extractive financial systems and land and property, to help support a regenerative economy, which hopefully will work better for people, planet and place. So I think that's the second thing about really mobilizing community wealth building to tackle the environmental crisis. And then the third, I think, the third challenge or reflection, I think, for us on Monday is, you know, how do we tackle the inertia of mindsets, particularly at a national government stage? How do we get Michael Gove to think, as Kate said, to adopt some of those transformative ideas that could make such a big difference to this community, to this country even? Because, you know, I think there's often an idea out there which is kind of unspoken that there is no alternative. And there can be kind of real groupthink around the idea that the best way to help places is to continue to focus on economic growth as the outcome. And I think that's often underpinned by private rather than public interests. But when you come to an event like this, or when you sit in a community of practice at CLES and hear about the work that's going on across the UK, it gives us all a glimpse and an insight that a better world is possible. And so I guess that's the kind of note that I want to leave us on, really. The fact that, yes, things seem really difficult, things seem really challenging, but stuff is changing, and people are doing things right across the UK that is challenging the status quo. And I think it's only a matter of time before we start to see that transformation start to take place at a national level as well. So I hope that's useful, and thanks again. It's been fantastic to be able to kind of have the chance to tell you some of my thoughts. And I have now, I think, probably set the team panicking that all of Monday's meetings have been cancelled to deal with those 3 chunky issues. But don't worry, we'll bite it off piece at a time.
Brilliant, Sarah. Thank you. I think what a tremendous rallying cry, and I think the phrase defrosting wealth is catching on. I can see it pinging around the system already. Brilliant. Okay, well, with those thoughts ringing in your ears, now we're going to have a break for until 2:05, so just after a little bit longer than we said. Take the chance, turn your cameras off, go and make a cup of tea, but have a bit of a think about, people have already got started, stuck into sharing their thoughts about not what they're going to do on Monday, but what they did on Wednesday, I think, in one case, which is absolutely fantastic. So yeah, do go and ponder what Monday will mean for you, and we'll be back here at 2:05 to hear from our panelists. Thank you. Okay, great. Lovely to have everybody back with us for the for our final bits of the summit this year. So I am delighted to get started with this final session by introducing 4 really good friends of CLES and of community wealth building. We've asked each of them to speak for 3 minutes, which is hardly any time at all, is it? About what they have learned this week in the sessions that they've joined. What's important about that for their work on community wealth building, and also that question which nobody's getting away with answering about what they plan to do next with the learning that they've picked up from this week. And after they've spoken, we'll get into a bit of a conversation between us, and then open the floor to your own points and commitments for Monday. So do keep them coming in the chat. It was great to see many of them coming in just before we broke off for the break. So do keep popping them in the chat, those commitments, what you're going to do on Monday. So I'm going to start us off by inviting our good friend Sarah McKinley to give us her thoughts. Sarah's Director for European Programmes at the Democracy Collaborative, and in her capacity directing the European programmes, she's building transatlantic partnerships, developing new community wealth building models and learning exchanges, and advancing the democratic economy in the UK and continental Europe. She's got a background in community development and has worked with community organisations at different levels, including the National Alliance for Community Economic Development Associations in Washington, DC. Sarah, over to you.
Thank you, Fran, and thanks everyone on the line and at CLES. This is no easy task to summarize such a week, certainly to be the last, and also to follow that incredible act between Kate and Sarah. What an inspiring conversation and rousing words. So I'll just start with saying how honored I am, and the Democracy Collaborative is, to be supporting CLES and to be supporting this event, and to be supporting as we can all the work that everyone here does on the ground day in and day out. So thank you for having us. It's a real honor. I'm truly inspired after this week. So many concrete examples and real work being done on the ground, from Scotland to Manchester, Wales to Wigan to Chicago even. There's so much going on, and that's generating for me, and I imagine for all of you, so much hope. We have the solutions. We know what works, we know we can do things differently, and we know that a new economy is possible because we have the seeds of it and we're seeing it, and we've been discussing it all week long and what you all are doing. So when I think about, what that hope and what more needs to be done and what we need to do on Monday, I'm gonna focus, I think, on what I think, there's so much to say, there's so much to do, but how can we focus? What do I think is most important? And what I think we risk a little bit in the buoyancy of our movement, in the excitement of all that's going on, is a little bit of complacency, if you will. We are in a moment of compounding crises, and COVID is really just the beginning, and of course, a symptom of a really sick society. And it's only exacerbated our extreme inequality, and it is going to continue to do so and lay bare our social unrest. And then, of course, on top of that, the bearing down climate change crises that we're already deep into. I mean, look at Vancouver right now as we speak, suffering from those effects. But this moment has also shown not only the centrality of community and the importance of the kind of work that community wealth builders are doing all over the place, but it has also shown how important local economies are, and local governments and the state, right? And what a huge role there is to play for that. So what I will say is that at this moment, I think we need to scale, and in order to do that, we need to grab the levers of power, and we need to reshape them to our means. We cannot be fooled. This is political. It does. I don't mean that's party political. It doesn't have to be, but it is in fact a political movement. We are directly challenging power structures, who owns and controls the economy, and we cannot depoliticize that. We cannot depoliticize the work that we do, and if we do, we risk losing. And if we lose, we risk a lot more than that. So I understand how dispiriting national politics are. I understand how dispiriting politics are in general, but we need policy, resources, and redistribution in real ways, real leveling up to do really what we need to do at scale. We need to be able to take the good work that's already happening at ground and wrap it in that ecosystem of policy, resource, and redistribution to really grow from the ground up. And we already have incredible political leaders doing this. There are many in this room. There are many in this movement. There are many networked and supported by class. But on Monday, in addition, we need more. In addition to all the concrete things that you're already doing, building co-ops, moving your money to credit unions, we need to get political. So run for office, start a campaign, support progressive candidates, demand certain policies. Don't settle for mere rhetoric that Kate was talking about, and demand action. We can do it. I've already seen some people post in the chat that they're doing that. They're engaging with their local councils. And from that, we can make change all the way up. So that's what I'd say. Thank you very much.
Wow, Sarah, brilliant. Thank you. You took us on a journey there, didn't you? Hope, optimism, some really bleak prospects, and then action and resolve. Okay, so Debbie, over to you. Debbie Pippard is Director of Programmes at Barry Cadbury Trust, and in addition to her role overseeing the Trust's programmes, she leads its economic justice programme, focusing on how local economies can be shaped to benefit local communities. The Trust has a particular interest in Birmingham, and much of its economic justice work is located there. And prior to joining the Trust, Debbie worked for the Big Lottery Fund, ran a charity, and worked in the NHS. So she knows her way around this landscape better than almost anyone. Debbie, over to you. Oh, we can't hear you, Debbie. Oh. Can you try?
Better?
Perfect.
Great. Okay, so we're moving to the big picture that Sarah was unveiling. national politics, big action, down to the much more local with Barra Cadbury. And I also want to congratulate Claire and the team on a really great week. My expectations were high for it, having worked with you for a long time, and I must say you've exceeded them. The thing that's been really great to see is just how many people are. There's a real feeling of a movement, and community wealth build being a credible alternative approach to local economies. And I've also been really glad to hear about the emphasis on all the sectors, the big institutions, the anchor networks that we've been working with in Birmingham and now Sandwell, but also the really local social enterprises, small businesses, and also the private as well as the public sector. Perhaps community wealth building started more with the public, but I think the discussions about the private have been really great as well. And I've had lots of inspiration over the week, but I'll pick on three things that particularly resonated, three small things that went ping for me. One was Mr. Tom Arthur talking about community wealth building in Scotland. Gosh, what an inspiration. And doesn't that just even more make us all want to move to Scotland? There's so much progressive work going there. Talking about influencing in less favourable political environments. And Claire's will know this is a bit of an obsession of ours, of how you get this stuff to resonate. There's loads in it to resonate with across the political spectrum. But how do we really get it so that people can stand on a political platform, Sarah, as you were saying, but not all from one side of politics. So his advice was engaging non-political actors and building bottom up rather than top down. Really good advice, and that's been talked about this week. Second was Hugh Thomas in West Wales talking about procurement shifting from price to value. And I know it's really hard to do. As Francis said, I've had experience of working in the health service. I know how tight those budgets are, but we do really need to start pricing in long-term benefits as well as short-term costs, and I'm really convinced that by this kind of community approach we will have better society, as Kate was saying so inspirationally earlier on. And then the third is back to divide. Lauren Bond, when she was talking about working in Coventry, talking about language, the language that we use. And that made me think that we need to use our empathy, imagination, and emotional intelligence when we're working across sector. So we don't just think about pushing our own thing, but we think about how it's receiving, how it can resonate with people who don't start off from the same point of view as us. Coming to my jobs for Monday, and I love this emphasis on the practical. And you're putting the do into think and do. And happily, it chimes really well with the direction of travel of our economic justice programme, which will see us in our next strategic period starting next year, working locally in Birmingham, the Black Country, to design a programme with our funded partners in those areas to co-influence local policy and practice so that we can create flourishing local economies. The lots of the themes that have come out this week will be seen in that programme, thinking about working across traditional silos and think grassroots up, as well as working with the big spenders. And so my Monday job is to see how they mesh with what we're intending to do. But at this stage, I can see that our role in that will be providing convening opportunities, maybe continuing some of the direct support that we do for infrastructure, particularly such enterprises, and really crucially, funding work that enables those further from power, and particularly those who have traditionally fared less well, so people from minority ethnic communities, disabled people, women and girls, people from families living in entrenched poverty, that they have a direct influence on how policy and practice works. And I think that's something that we can bring that maybe is a bit different to some of the people in this conference. And the other thing I want to start today, which is that we're funding a Business and the Community Task Force, looking at how business can support place-based regeneration. Business and the community has got a call for action, and I think there have been lots of things this week which show how business can contribute to this agenda. And so I'm going to pop the link to the call for action in the chat. And so if you want to, you could fill in that little form and share the good work that you're doing. So that's my Monday job and my job for the next 5 years, I think. So thank you very much for this opportunity, and look forward to hearing what other people have.
Wonderful, thank you, Debbie. And you know, somebody was saying to me just yesterday that there's a huge amount that people working in public procurement could learn from all the thinking and work that's gone on by grant making trusts about how you use the power of grant making as a creative force for change. And I think that absolutely speaks to what you've just been describing there and what we know of you from working closely with you. So thank you for that, and good to hear there's more of it to come. Lovely. Okay, I'm going to turn now to Vidya Alexson. Vidya is the founding chief exec of Power to Change, an independent trust set up in 2015 to support community business across England as a means to creating more prosperous and cohesive communities. Vidya has got extensive policy experience, worked for a number of think tanks and in government, both in the UK and the US. Prior to setting up Power to Change, Vidya was Deputy Chief Exec at the Resolution Foundation, which is a leading public policy think tank working on issues that affect low and middle income families. So Vidya, over to you.
Great, thank you very much, Frances. And to echo what others have said, I mean, congratulations to the whole CLES team on a fantastic week. And it is so exciting to see this now as a sort of landmark event in the calendar on an annual basis, it's great. So I was going to say, so I took your Monday, what am I going to do on Monday thing very seriously. And I've got 3 actions for Monday. And I'll wrap my reflections into my actions for Monday. My 4th action would be to move to Scotland, sort of much as Debbie has said, but on the assumption that that isn't sort of what you're looking for, that we all up sticks and move to Scotland, I'll focus on some other things. So I think the first thing for me is that whilst clearly systemic change really matters, and I really sort of empathise with a lot of what Sarah said, I also think one of the things that we also need to do is to shout louder about the examples that are out there. Because I think, particularly in our work at Power to Change, it's often tempting to think that these are all quite small, but I think they do prefigure the economy and the society that we're trying to build. I think they are very much sort of small glimmers of the new economy that community wealth building is trying to create. And so I think collectively, we really need to give them oxygen. And I was very struck, I don't know how many people have read Robert Putnam's most recent book, The Upswing. And in it, he talks about how change in society was created in the US, sort of moving from the early period of the last century through to the sort of middle of the last century. And what he talks about is that change comes from the grassroots and that government then tends to follow. And that really stuck with me because I do think there is a need, therefore, to amplify and to celebrate like all of these amazing examples that we've heard over the course of the week, and to really see them as beacons of hope and sort of they give people an image of the possible about a future that we're all trying to move towards. So for me, that's the first thing that I and we collectively sort of really give oxygen to some of these great examples that we've heard about all week. The second really is about building bridges and collaborating like crazy. I think we sometimes in this movement, we accentuate our differences. And Sarah and I had a conversation, Sarah Longlands and I have had a conversation about this very recently, that we tend to accentuate the small differences between ourselves, whether, you know, we work on community business or community wealth building or employee ownership or worker ownership, when actually the things that we have in common are so much greater than the system that we're all trying to push against. And so I think there's a real moment now that we can all kind of come together much more cohesively and try to drive change and try to change the large system of power that we're all really trying to affect, particularly in light, as Sarah McKinley's already said, of those huge crises that we're all collectively facing. So I think there's an opportunity really to solidify this as a broad movement, a kind of a bigger tent that we can all be part of. And then the third thing I think is one particularly for Power to Change, is that I think we need to try really hard to find ways to get more patient capital into the hands of communities so that they can own more land and property in their communities. So it's something that at Power to Change, we've probably invested about 80 million over the last 6 years in communities owning assets, but we have less capital now than we used to, which I regret. But I think it's something that we need to push other funders to move towards, because as we know, and I think the conference has really demonstrated, I mean, ownership is right at the heart of this, because actually it defines who has power in the economy and who holds wealth in the economy. And we need a huge shift, a massive shift in ownership and wealth and power if we're going to get to the kind of economy that can deal with the crises that we are there in terms of inequality and climate basically people actually being included and prospering in the economy. So we've been working on a concept which I really want to drive hard next year, called around a high streets buyout fund. But can we use the sort of wake of COVID and the challenges that there are on the high street to actually swoop up properties that can be held then long term by communities, so that what we don't get is this delicate moment in the economy, seeing a lot of private sort of irresponsible wealth coming into communities and taking over those properties. But I think collectively and collaboratively, we, finding ways of getting more and more capital into the hands of the brilliant organisations that we've all heard about this week, who can then start to take more ownership of their places locally, I think is absolutely critical. So those will be my three things I'll be getting out of bed for Monday.
Crikey. Yeah, that's quite some Monday. And brilliant. That's absolutely fantastic, Vidya. Thank you. The heavy lifting of shifting capital to communities is ringing in my ears. Okay, so last but not least, Jo Cullinane is going to finish off this particular section. Jo is the leader of North Ayrshire Council and their cabinet lead for community wealth building. North Ayrshire are the first community wealth building council in Scotland, so I think destination number one for everybody on the panel just at the moment. Last November they signed £251 million North Ayrshire growth deal with all the projects adopting the principles of community wealth building, including £3 million dedicated to community wealth building fund. They've also created an anchor institution charter with 7 organisations pledging to join the council in encouraging local spend and investing in local companies wherever possible. And having read your annual report recently, Jo, I know that there's many, many, many other things besides, but I'd love to hear your reflections and where you're going from here. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much, Fran, and well done everyone again on a really successful summit. I think my first reflection of the summit, as always, is just the breadth of community wealth building practice that there is across the UK. And I think we meet as the Community of Practice Network, and that's great, sharing examples and knowledge, etc. But it goes well beyond just local authorities, and even just this session with some of the speakers shows that. Other reflection was in the first session. I think Tom Arthur, one of the first questions he asked was about the role of the private sector, and I think that's always quite a difficult question to answer. I think there is a role for the private sector, and I give the example of the North Ayrshire economy and the prevalence of sort of family-owned businesses in North Ayrshire. There's definitely a role within community wealth building for family-owned businesses who are rooted in the local community. They're committed to the region. It's not just their business location, but at the end of the day, it's their home. The only short warning I would give to that is they are very different from those big multinational companies who we see situated in our place, who have no real loyalty or that to the people or the area that they're situated in. I think as a community wealth building council as well, the summit always helps sort of reflecting your own practice. So again, I've been out visiting some local businesses over the last few weeks that are supported by our business team. We're supporting them to try and win public contracts, to support them investing in their staff with a living wage, offering modern apprenticeships, etc. Supporting them to move into bigger premises, including through public investment in our commercial estate, etc. So that's all been really good practice, and I'm picking that up on the ground. But from Monday, I think we still need to build capacity to support more cooperatives, worker-owned businesses, social enterprises, etc. And I think we still need that capacity to be built. So that would be one of the actions I would take away on Monday. I think you also had some good workshops the other day. One in particular I thought was interesting in terms of the high street. It got me thinking about some of the challenges that we are going to face over the next few years with the high street and commercial property, etc. in general. And it reflects on where we are in North Ayrshire. Just announced this week that the former pub in Irvine, the King's Arms that we purchased last year, we've now developed the plan to convert that into new council housing. And I think that's a model that we would certainly look to roll out with vacant buildings going forward. And to support that, we've just created a repurposing property grant. So again, from Monday, we'll look to continue working with some of those sites to get them back into productive use. The other session on financial levers, As some in Cles will know, we've got a community investment fund that's been available to local community groups to tap into. They're starting to use it to take ownership of land and buildings. For example, in the island of Cumbria, they've used it to raise over £2 million now to restore the town hall in the island back into a productive use for the island. So again, a fantastic community-led project, and we'll look to expand that as well. Kind of two final things just to touch upon. We're really keen to link this into the climate agenda, and I think it's been mentioned during the week at the summit that we have already approved 2 council-owned solar farms. They'll generate 850, or reduce our CO2 emissions by 850 tonnes, generate about 2/3 of the council's own energy needs, but also bring a financial surplus of £25 million to the council. So the question for Monday is, how do you use that £25 million? And I've got to say we're working on a really ambitious renewable energy project at one of our industrial sites, the scale of which will make the 2 solar farms already approved seem small. So I think on a greater scale, we're looking at, can we use that sort of initiative to provide finance to scale up our community wealth building work and deliver a local Green New Deal. And the final one, and I hate to dampen everyone's enthusiasm for what's happening in Scotland, as someone working in this ecosystem, I am reflecting that there's definitely a gap between some of the rhetoric and the delivery on the ground. But I think one of the actions that we certainly have to take over the next few months is to try and influence the direction of the Community Wealth Building Act in Scotland to make sure that it addresses the economic transformation that we need to see. And one of the ways that we will do that is we're going to invite Tom Arthur to the next meeting of the Community Wealth Building Commission in North Ayrshire, so that he can hear the challenges and barriers of community wealth building practice on the ground for the various anchor institutions, including the NHS, the college, police and fire in Scotland, etc. So I think that will be an important initiative for us to take forward the next few weeks. So thanks, Fran, for that.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Joe. And as clear-sighted and honest and challenging as ever to yourselves and to the rest of us. So thank you all for those wonderfully inspiring reflections. What we're going to do now is just we've been looking at across the week at some of the things that people have put forward as what can you do on Mondays, and there's some real themes emerging. I thought we could just sort of, talk about them a little bit between us and then open up to some people from the session itself. Joe, I think I'll come to you first, actually, because one of the real themes that came up for a lot of people was this question about, in the summit, we get these voices from multiple different perspectives together and really interesting conversations happen. And, you've got people working on environmental crisis and inequality and generative wealth. And I'm interested in people saying, how can I recreate that kind of convening together at a local level? And I know you've obviously set up the commission, Community Wealth Building Commission in North Ayrshire. So I wondered if you could speak a bit to your experience of doing that and any words of wisdom you've got for how to convene people in place in that way.
Okay, yeah, no, absolutely fine, Fran. So one of the first actions that we did when we worked with Cles a number of years ago on our diagnostic report was we set up a community wealth building commission, which is all the kind of public anchor institutions at the table looking at their own practice, and that's then led to the development of our anchor charter, which pledges each of the signatories to a range of actions across the 5 pillars. We also added a 6th pillar, as you know, on climate change, so that the other anchor institutions are considering their own decarbonisation agenda, etc. I think that was really important. I mean, it really much focuses on the practice of community wealth building and tries to get the other anchor institutions into the same place that we are as a local authority, particularly given that some of them don't have economic development teams, business support teams, etc., and they need to understand their role within the economy. For example, the NHS will never improve the health and well-being of the population by just providing an A&E service. They need to be actively involved in creating good, well-paid jobs, and to get that sort of mindset shift is really important. So the Commission allows us to do that. Alongside that, we do have the expert panel, which Sarah is a member of, and a load of other good colleagues and friends are members of that expert panel as well. And that's really there to kind of challenge our mindset in terms of the policy delivery. and to make sure that our rhetoric definitely matches up with our delivery. I mean, I'm pretty sure that if I fall short, then Sarah, etc., won't be slow in telling me to buck up my ideas and get my finger out, and that's great. But the Commission is very much about making sure that we have that kind of discussion. I think there is two things that we probably need to think about as a movement, though, in terms of community wealth building. One is, how do we put the community into wealth building and make sure that the community has got a seat at the table, particularly if we are talking about setting up worker cooperatives and generative businesses, and also the community taking ownership of assets, etc. You can't do that without them being there. The second people that we need to think about the role is trade unions. And I think going forward, there might be an idea in terms of the summit to really kind of focus in and harness in the issue of labour and the power that workers could bring to this movement as well. I think they're the two areas that I certainly want to address in North Ayrshire, but I think as a movement we need to address as well. Brilliant.
Thank you, Joe. And I think that speaks to another theme that's come through from a lot of people, which is this question about, we might, quite a lot of places have corralled their anchor institutions together in various ways. I'm not aware of anywhere else that's done anything like the expert panel that you've got, but this question about how do you build connection between people at the community level and then build that into the infrastructure of community wealth building locally is one that's come around a lot. And feels to me like people mentioned a sort of, how do you build the ecosystem to support those grassroots community organisations, individuals, groups that could become the community businesses, the worker-owned co-ops, the community organisations that could take on that role in economies. And Vidya, I wondered if that was something that you could speak to, perhaps, about that development of ecosystems in place that kind of enable the development of those grassroots roots of the movement.
Yeah, I mean, it's quite complex, I suppose. I mean, I think strong infrastructure organisations have a really big part to play. So where we generally see sort of strong kind of growth of community businesses and other kinds of alternative businesses, there tend to be strong infrastructure organisations. And I think, one sort of message I would put out to funders is we tend to be the funding of infrastructure organisations tends to go in and out of flavour. I mean, you'll have periods where funders recognise that it's really important, and then you'll have periods where funders say, actually, we don't fund infrastructure organisations. And I think it's absolutely critical that it is something that we do all kind of recognise the value of. If we want strong growth in that community-led economic development sort of bottom-up part of community wealth building, we are going to absolutely need strong infrastructure organisations. And I think critically, if we want that to be a more inclusive approach, we need different kinds of infrastructure organisations. We need to probably reach out beyond the ones that we generally have all worked with and think about who are the infrastructure organisations that speak to minoritized communities, who are the infrastructure organisations that speak to disabled communities. So I think we need to be more pluralistic in the infrastructure organisations that we support. But I also think there's something about the support for the individual leaders. So what I've seen in place is that it's often the inspirational local leaders at the community level who then inspire others in their communities to get other things started. So that the base level of having some strong infrastructure organisations is a part of it, but it's also, I think, about supporting some of those inspirational local kind of community entrepreneurs and other kinds of entrepreneurs who then can inspire others. And we're seeing in places like Hastings, for example, real ecosystems now of businesses that are developing, supporting each other and kind of forming a really collaborative network. And that's because they're all kind of sparking off each other. So I think we need a combination of those two things in places to make this really work.
And thank you, Vidya. And Debbie, I wondered, because you were talking yourself about, particularly in the economic justice programme of the Trust, and this focus again, resonating with much what Vidya said there about ensuring that is an approach which is intersectional, which understands the issues for minoritised communities. And I just wondered if you had reflections from the work that you've done on what works is a trite way of putting it, isn't it? But what are the sort of examples you think that others could learn from in how to make sure that our approaches, particularly around economic development, and the support for community level engagement in that is inclusive?
Thank you. Yes, and I second everything that Vidya said about that development of infrastructure and looking at different places. I think one thing which is working perhaps in our favour at the moment is that there is a big emphasis in a lot of funders about working in a place, of doing kind of place-based approaches, place-based systems change, but I think sometimes that's a bit partial. So people working on kind of particular issues, but working very much kind of with perhaps some of those more traditional voluntary sector organisations. And so I think one of the things that works is to look really imaginatively about what's happening in a place and all these different these different sort of institutions and sectors, and recognising the fuzziness of some of the boundaries about this, the boundaries between voluntary community sector and social enterprise, and sometimes social enterprise and small businesses, those very small businesses, because sometimes the outcomes from those are not so distinguishable. I think that we should be looking to organisations that are led by people with lived experience of the particular issues that you were talking about. And one of the things, again, Vidya also touched on, is this needs long-term consistent funding. And what I would hope is any organisation that's working in a place is in it for the long term, is helping to build those institutions. One of the great, sort of lights on the impact from voluntary sector funding is the kind of stop, start, and now it's infrastructure, and now it's domestic violence, and now it's cats homes. You know, it's kind of you sort of don't get anywhere with any of that. The approach that we've tried to take in Birmingham is to look at those different sectors, and in particular, there's been some really great work, Fran, and I know that you know this, particularly the Poverty Truth Commission that was set up in Birmingham, which is a fantastic example of bringing people together. So the Poverty Truth Commission worked with a bunch of people who've got lived experience of kind of severe and multiple poverty and life challenges, worked with them to kind of identify their stories, identify the elements that had led them into the sort of life circumstances in which they found themselves, really supported them, really empowered them, made them really confident, and then worked with a second bunch of people. All these people called commissioners. They were all commissioners in the Poverty Truth Commission, but the second group was kind of people who were in positions of power, did sort of more or less the same thing with them, and then brought the two groups together to work on particular issues that were relevant. And that was, there have been a lot of Poverty Truth Commissions, I'm sure a lot of them have been great, but this one was absolutely fantastic, had a really big impact on the local authority, which then has asked the Poverty Truth Commission to work on our housing issue. And so I think that's an example of where a grassroots approach of really supporting and working with people who haven't before had a voice in policy can have a really profound impact. And I'd like to see people, all the great people are talking about community wealth building in their places, think about how some of those things can be reported, because you will really learn things and it will have a really profound impact on what you do.
Brilliant, thanks Debbie. And it resonates there, doesn't it, with the with keeping us honest. I think your point, Joe, about the expert panel and community wealth building. Sarah McKinley, I wondered if I could come to you, and I want to try and squish two things together here, which I hope sort of work. They work in my head anyway. It feels like there's something coming out of this about the vast array of examples and work that people are doing all over the UK, and you and others are aware of stuff across the Atlantic and elsewhere as well. And so there's one question, isn't there, that's like, well, how can we learn from that? But I want to sort of put a different spin on that, because I think your challenge to us at the beginning was, how do we not get complacent? So how do we bring ourselves together in ways which keep us honest, to Joe's challenge, you know, to make sure that we're not just getting together and sharing a bit of best practice and all that awful business, but get together in a way that kind of keeps us relentless and focused on that scale of challenge. So just a small question.
Yeah, but an excellent question. I mean, I guess sort of in short, I'd just say never underestimate the power of sort of friendly competition. I think bringing people together, not only can you learn from one another, but you can see what others are doing and be pushed by it and moved by it. You know, one of the things about community wealth building that is both appealing but also challenging is that it is a bespoke process. It is a bespoke method, right? It depends upon the conditions of a place, right? So your approach, your engagement depends on the assets of your place and what you can leverage and how you can move things. So, but the challenge behind that is that then people become, I would say, a little bit precious about their place, right? Oh no, I'm very, very different from North Ayrshire. We're very, very different from Preston. No, these things are not the same. Hi, Joe's daughter's joining us, so I couldn't help but say hi. You know, so, but you'd be surprised by, even though, yes, the assets and the concerns that you're addressing are very specific to your place, there are a lot of learnings from other places. So for example, right now, me and my colleague, your former colleague, Neil, are working together with the city of Chicago to assess sort of their community wealth building approach. And the city of Chicago is it's a huge metropolis, right? It is a very complex behemoth of an urban area with lots of different issues and very, very different, you would think, than a place like North Ayrshire. But in fact, a lot of the learnings from what North Ayrshire has done already and is doing and are learning from themselves can be fed into the kinds of things that Chicago would like to do. For example, an expert panel to keep them accountable, to keep them moving. How is that expert panel comprised? How can we bring more community voice to that panel to keep the city sort of honest and accountable? An anchor charter, another thing that Joe and his team have put into play in North Ayrshire and other places, of course, across the UK, is something that we're recommending to Chicago. And of course, you know, when you talk to a place like Chicago, you know, the city of broad shoulders, they're unique, and, you know, but they also want to do everything the best. So when they hear about sort of some little place they maybe have never heard about before being far more progressive and far more assertive and far more ahead of them, then it does inspire and put some fire under them to do more. So I think, you know, making those connections, even though there is huge difference in between them, is a really powerful way to really keep us at the progressive edge, to fight against that complacency, because there's always someone who's doing it better or trying harder or experimenting. And so we need to feed that in and keep that spirit of sort of leading edge always at the front of what we do.
Fabulous. Thank you, Sarah. Okay, right. So we're going to try some new some tech wizardry here and call out participants from the session to actually speak to some of the commitments that they've been putting in the chat box as we've been going along. So so Carl from Rochdale Borough Housing. It sounds like being an old style talk show host, this, doesn't it? Come on down. Brilliant, Carl.
Hello.
Hello. I was really struck by your job advert in the chat. I don't think we've ever had a live job advert in a Crazy Wealth Building Summit before. I wondered, Carl, if you could just talk a little bit about what that role will be. See if anyone in the room might want to apply. But more interestingly, what your this shift that you've seen from social value post to one focusing on community wealth building.
Yeah, no, it was a bit of a shameless plug on my part. Well, I thought I'd just get it in there. Yeah, so we've been working hard as a social housing provider to incorporate social value into our procurement models, and we've been doing lots of work on that over the last few years, as have lots of other places as well. And we just see this as almost a bit of a natural extension to that. So build on that good work to broaden out the scope. And, we manage around 14,000 homes. We're a cooperative as well. And I just think it's the right thing to do to broaden out. We do lots of community investment work, but we just need to tie the strands together, work with partner agencies as well. So working with our the local authority in Rochdale, as well as in Greater Manchester, and tried to build that movement. So as one of the small pieces in the puzzle.
Wonderful. Great to hear from you, Carl. And actually, Rochdale Borough-wide housing features in our toolkit for housing associations, which is on the CLES website. So if you're interested in what they've been getting up to, have a look at Carl's advert and have a look at that publication on our website. Thanks, Carl. Great to hear from you. Okay, next we're going to go to Jane Seymour. Judy, sorry, not Jane. Judy, it'd be great to hear. You were talked about a number of points in what you're going to do on Monday, and then there was something tantalising about your housing programme. So I just wondered if we could hear a bit more about that.
Yeah, hi. I'm a member of the Green Party in North Tyneside, and we've been working on a manifesto, and community wealth building has made it into our manifesto. So what we can see in our area is massive housing programme development, new estates coming up all over the place. A lot of the kind of landowners have been selling off, or I'm not sure if they've sold the land or they're renting the land to Persimmon and other housing builders. And it seems that there is no kind of consideration for how those building programs are going to impact on the council's own climate action plan. And we can't see that there's any evidence of a connection between the procurement processes and what's likely to happen. And there's quite a lot of community distress around this, because people can see nature corridors disappearing, and it's a bit of a bad situation. So we're just now starting to look at how we might kind of look at procurement levers and start agitating the council to do something about it. Baby slopes.
Nothing wrong with baby slopes, Judy. Brilliant. Not at all. Fantastic. Great. Thanks for that, Judy. Okay, I think there's a job opportunities off going on in the chat. So Chris from Bury is advertising for people too. So for those of you who did want to move to Scotland, there's a job right there. I think you might get a few applicants, Chris. Okay, we're gonna one more person we're gonna hear from in the audience. Actually, we're gonna go to Ellie Radcliffe, our very own researcher at CLES. Ellie, you put something in the chat about on Monday thinking about community wealth building and the role of trade unions, picking up from Joe's point, I think. So Ellie, tell us more.
Yeah, I feel like trade unions are an area that we could really dig in deeper on. When we look at the Fair Work principles in Scotland, for example, representation is one of the Fair Work principles within work. And if we're thinking about democracy in the workplace, whether that's ownership or otherwise, unions are an obvious way to go. And I think as well, building on what Joe said, this is a really interesting area to look at in terms of how we inspire movement around climate and environmental breakdown too. There are a number of unions pulling together proposals and kind of training programs for their members to push for more environmental practices and decarbonisation within their workplaces, whether that is in councils, whether that's in kind of oil refineries, for example. So there's a big part to play for the union movement in that. And I think I agree with Joe, looking at the depth that we can go with that in community wealth building would be really great. And that's just one idea from today. There are loads more, but we have so much time. So yeah.
Wonderful. Thanks, Ellie. That's great. Okay, well, we could go on and on all afternoon, but this is getting towards time to wrap up. So I'll just say a thank you to our panelists. It was really wonderful to hear from all four of you. And I'm going to hand over to Sarah Longland for our closing comments. Thanks, Sarah.
Thanks very much, Fran. And yeah, I love the fact that we've got job adverts in the chat for the summit. It's really, it's not theoretical. It's actually happening, and it's actually changing stuff, which I think is brilliant. So, I mean, I guess, just thank you to everyone for coming along and spending this week with us and participating in all of the sessions, and particularly to our partners without whom this event would not have been possible. So the Barrow Cadbury Trust, the Democracy Collaborative and Power to Change. And a huge thank you as well to our keynote speaker this afternoon, Kate Pickett. It was really great to have her insights and knowledge and bringing it from that kind of experience that she's had in her academic work, and then straight into the work that she's done in Greater Manchester. Really interesting to hear that, and also the chance to imagine life as Michael Gove, which is interesting. But also thank you to our panelists this afternoon, Sarah McKinley, Debbie Pippard, Vidya Alexon, and Joe Cullinan, and also, of course, to Fran for chairing the discussion. And a big thank you to all of our speakers throughout the summit, because as the last session has shown, and what an interesting session that was. I mean, we were just saying actually that I think I want to watch it again just to really absorb and to think about what everyone said. But it shows that the learning that you've given everyone this week is really going to be turned into real and meaningful change up and down the country, and maybe even further afield as well. And of course, a final thank you goes to you, the delegates. The contributions that you've made all week are really what this movement is all about. You're the practitioners on the ground, building change step by step, so that our local economies can function better for people and places and the planet. And we salute you and we thank you so much for coming. Just a reminder that all of the sessions have been recorded, and we will share links to the recording so that you can catch up on anything that you missed next week. And that's one of the perks of doing things online. And there is still time to add your contribution to the What Will We Do on Monday pile. And we will be sending a little incentive. We will be sending a little thank you to those of you who have been able to contribute. And it's been really interesting to hear your responses and really kind of heartening as well. And just to kind of, I guess, just sort of take us back to where we started at the beginning of the week. I was thinking about this last night, and the last time I closed a CLES event was back in 2010, when I last worked at CLES. And it was at a time when austerity was just starting to roll in. And at the end of the conference, I quoted Macbeth, and I said, you know, when shall we all meet again in thunder, lightning, or in rain? When the hurly-burly's done, when the battle is lost and won. And I was thinking about it last night because more than a decade later, we've had huge changes. You know, austerity has rolled in. The hurly-burly is not done yet, and in fact, we've got new battles that are now raging on the horizon. And so it's a kind of a moment to reflect upon that. But the other thing that's changed since 2010 is the fact that we've had this huge wave of economic activism. This huge movement has started to grow and develop through community wealth building. And that, I guess, gives us hope. And this summit is a story of that hope. And the way in which we have been collaborating like mad, as Vidya said. And you know, a story that even when things have been so difficult, people have been brave enough to try and do something different, to challenge the status quo of wealth and power in this country. So I think that's a real inspiration. I just want to finish by really paying tribute to the whole of the CLES team, who have worked so hard over the last few months to develop the summit in between doing the day job. And they've you know, any of you have gone to the sessions this weekend, the panel workshops, and seen the amount of work that's gone into making those really interesting and stimulating will attest to that. But I just wanted to pay a very special thanks to our external affairs team, to Helen and to Lisa. I mean, Lisa only joined us 2 weeks ago. So it must have felt like a baptism of fire, but she's done brilliantly. So a really big thank you to her for getting stuck in. So I think that's all I wanted to say. We've all got our work cut out for us on Monday, and I hope that to see you all again back here next year. That'll be one job for me on Monday, starting to plan next year's Community Wealth Building Summit. And if you do have comments or thoughts or feedback for us on how this year's gone, we'd love to hear from you. But for the time being, really safe journey back to your kitchens and to your living rooms, and have a brilliant weekend, and see you all again soon. Thanks very much.